Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in. If you can take a quick moment to go ahead and fill out the poll on your Zoom screen, that would be greatly appreciated. That way, we'll have the opportunity to tailor our conversation today accordingly. And for those of you who are joining us on live stream via Facebook, you'll find the questions in the comment section. So please go ahead and just put in A, B, or C, or whatever your option is in the comment. While we give people a few more minutes to get on, please take a time and go ahead and fill out that poll while we continue to listen to amazing, inspiring music. Thank you.
For once in my life, it's gonna feel real good. Gonna make a difference. Gonna make it right.
Fantastic. Thank you guys so much for filling out the poll. And for those of you who are just joining us, can you please just take a quick moment to fill out the poll that you'll find on Zoom. And for those of you joining us via live stream on Facebook, if you can just put it on your comment section, we would really appreciate that. It will help ensure that we can tailor today's conversation accordingly so we can meet everyone at their point of interest. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Sherifah Munis, and I am the founder and executive director of the Newwave Foundation. It's an organization that focuses on creating educational opportunities for deserving students. And we do this through provision of scholarships, mentorships, as well as workshops. I am so happy to welcome you all today for our first live stream Fireside Chat event being held in honor of Mental Health Awareness Month. For so long, there's unfortunately been stigma around the whole concept of mental health. And I hope that through our conversation today, that in our small way, we can help to start to change that narrative. Just before we get started, I just wanted to take a quick moment to be very candid and open with all of you. When I first made a decision to hold this forum, it was supposed to be a webinar with several guests, which would have allowed me to take a back seat and be a listener just like you guys. But a little over a month ago, I myself had a situation where I found myself pretty anxious and just going through a time where I just was really finding it hard to focus. And I actually had a very heartfelt conversation with our guest today, MaryBeth Hyland. And that conversation made me realize that I couldn't take a back seat. And I wanted to come up front and center by having this fireside chat with her today and having a very open and honest conversation. So this is my first time having a forum of this sort. So I ask you all for grace. I ask you all for permission for me to be human as a recovering perfectionist. I'm not expecting today to be perfect, but I am hoping that it could be as real as we all make it out to be. So without further ado, I am extremely pleased to introduce you to my guest today, MaryBeth Hyland. She is the founder and chief visionary of SparkVision and knows that extraordinary success is rooted in the vision, values, and culture crafted by purpose-driven leaders and their tribe. With over 12 years of experience, she's known for her ability to create movements across generations and does so with the understanding that we all have a deep desire to know and return to our most authentic selves at work, home, and within. She is an award recipient of Innovator of the Year, Top 100 Women, and Civic Engagement Leader, just to name a few. Her latest book, Permission to be Human, fulfills her personal life's mission to create spaces where voices are heard, stories are released, and purpose is ignited. We are so glad to have you here, MaryBeth.
It's such a gift to be here. I have to say, Sherifah, even as you were just giving your opening remarks, I had my hands on my heart and I just thought, oh, it's already so beautiful. So I appreciate this amazing opportunity to be with you and to be with everyone who is joining us this afternoon.
Absolutely. I have to say, we've really come a long way from, gosh, was it a little over 2 years ago when I saw this amazing post you put out on LinkedIn. And I immediately reached out to you and I said, I need to know this woman.
Yeah, you're amazing that way, Sherifah. You are a woman of action, right? You're a woman of action. It was, and actually, it's something that I remember because it was a post about authenticity and how we all have the right to live an authentic life. But so many of us think that we need other people's permission to do that. And so many people think it's a luxury versus something that's attainable. And the beginning was about making people recognize that it starts right here. It starts in our mind on what we have permission to be or not to be versus looking at everybody else. So it's pretty amazing to think that authenticity was the post that connected us. And you know, you brought me in for some really meaningful collaborations, and now being able to work with you one-on-one, it's not only a gift to be able to do this work with you, but to be able to watch you continue to evolve and become in complete alignment with your authentic self. So what a wonderful way to start this conversation.
Thank you so much. Honestly, I feel like you are a kindred spirit. And I have to say that, you know, in some of the conversations we've had, you know, we've talked about just how difficult these times are, especially living in the time of a pandemic. There's no one right now that can say that they have not experienced some level of stress or anxiety or the other, because I know I have. And so hearing the title of your book, Permission to be Human, it really spoke to me. And I'm just curious, you know, when was the idea for this book born?
Yeah, so boy, I bet this probably is true for so many people who were writing their first book. This has been living inside of me for a long time. So it very much feels like a birthing process of having it come out into the world in a few weeks from now. But Permission to be Human came about really because of that exact phrase. We so often do not give ourselves permission to be human, nor do the people around us. So then when we try to, it can make us feel like something's wrong with us, right? And so when I was coming out of prior work before I started my own business, I often found myself to be the underdog. I felt like I was really alone when it came to advocating for people's well-being, for the culture that we were creating as a result of our behaviors, for wanting to do what was right for folks who were volunteering their time. I came from the nonprofit sector, so I worked with a lot of volunteers, and I just really wanted to be thoughtful about the process in which we were asking for people to give of themselves. And for me, the answer was by igniting our humanity, by connecting one another through our shared values, by lifting each other up from a place of those common intrinsic motivators. And so igniting purpose along the way. And that unfortunately wasn't always something that people around me thought was a good idea. They thought I was like trying to do a bunch of things that was totally fine for me to do, but not for the rest of the folks to adopt. And so as I went out onto my own and started my own business and now work with people all over the world who are turned on by this type of messaging and support, I found that actually I wasn't alone in these feelings. And there were lots of people who wanted this, but it first started by finding those communities and those connections with people who really wanted to give themselves and others permission to be human, but maybe didn't know what step one looked like.
Wow. No, I can definitely, relate to that. And, just as a segue, for as long as I've known you, you haven't really shied away from sharing, some of the personal stories that have really shaped you and shaped your career. And I was wondering if you're willing to, share a story that, comes to mind, or that you're willing to share, that really has inspired not only the way you approach work, but that can hopefully help us as those listening to you to start to think about how we can also approach work, especially given all the stressors that we have right now.
Yeah, so there's a couple layers to that question. And I share this story pretty vocally because I know that there are people listening here who have a similar story, who maybe haven't ever heard it framed in this way. And so the beginning of all of this, like, where did this all come from? How did this get instilled inside of me? Those things I mentioned before about why did I write the book, like feeling alone, feeling like I was an underdog, and basically wanted other people to realize they weren't, and that we were all in this together. That was my whole experience growing up. I was raised in a family where my mother was a therapist, so there was a lot of education and understanding of how important it is to take care of your mental wellness. But then behind the scenes, when my mother wasn't around, my father was abusive. And he was mentally, physically, and verbally abusive, to the point where he told me that if I said anything about it, that my parents would get divorced and it would be my fault. So he was very skillful. He was masterful in the way that he had erupted on us at home, and on how to kind of put the pieces back together just enough so that by the time mom got back, that, we could keep our mouths shut. And it was an experience where I was always told that I was really sensitive, that I was highly emotional, that I cared too much, I was a crybaby, but people didn't know what was happening behind the scenes, right, with my dad. And so all of those feelings and the way I was being was a direct response of living inside of a toxic environment that was a secret. And one of the things that, thank goodness for therapy and all of the wonderful practitioners out there that can help us in making these connections. But when I started to go to therapy and was able to really pull the wisdom out of those wounds, I found that the skills that I was really labeled as, so that crybaby, that overly sensitive, those kinds of things that were really tacked on as negative labels, were my greatest skills. They were my biggest superpowers, and the way they were formed came from being highly in tune with my father's behavior. So I was really aware of when he was in a bad mood, when his body language was sending me a message that something was about to happen, when his tone of voice changed. And I learned how to chameleon my way through life with him so that I could get the least amount of abuse, and that I could make him change his mindset so that he wasn't in a place of violence when we were together and alone in those moments. And so I never talked about that. I never acknowledged that as something that I did or a part of my journey. And again, going through the process of therapy and other different practices, I learned that that is my greatest superpower. And that is what I have to offer the world. And if it weren't for that incredibly difficult experience growing up, I would not be able to do what I'm doing today. So being able to fully own it and embrace it and say, this is where my greatest skills were born. I can take it in as a part of me that doesn't need to be hidden anymore. And it's a part of me that I can harness for good in other people's lives. And it's been really powerful to share the story and for other people to be able to say, I never thought about that. I never considered that. I saw a recent study that said that 85% of families have toxic behaviors.
Wow. Wow.
So I know I'm not alone, right? And everybody defines things differently in their minds of what it means, right? To be toxic or to be abusive. And so I'm just one person here to say that if you've ever experienced that, you are not alone, and that it is okay to speak up about it and to get help in supporting your own journey and being able to own that as a part of the power in your life.
Wow. Thank you so much for being so candid and vulnerable with us and sharing that story. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate in their respective ways to, something, whether it's in their childhood or an experience that has shaped who they are today and helps them to, handle or approach things accordingly just based on that experience. In a recent article that you actually cited in one of your newsletters, you had mentioned that nearly 70% of American workers, I guess based on the polling, reported that the COVID-19 pandemic has been the most stressful time of their career. And as a mom of kids who are virtually schooling right now, as a wife, as an entrepreneur, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a friend, I'm a colleague. I have so many different hats, just like I'm sure so many people who are listening today also wear so many different hats. I know I have friends who have had to deal with health issues. I have loved ones that have had to deal with even, death in their families. I have folks who for the first time are having to be caregivers for elderly parents. The list goes on, and yet we still have to buck up and show up to work and be productive and just keep things pushing. And it's tough, because we're all dealing with things and we all process things differently. We all react to things differently. Do you have any tips or any advice, especially during times like this, to really manage the stress and the anxiety and all that goes with that?
Oh, yes. And it's Sherifah, like everything you just said, I know every single person here has at least one of those in common, right? At least one. This is a time where I think that it was like maybe 6 months into the pandemic, it's like, okay, so now we have this remote thing figured out. So now we can just go back to the capacity that we were taking on before, as if it's normal again, but now normal from home. And it's really missing a lot when those kinds of mindsets and stigmas are attached to expectation within the workplace, especially. I'm seeing here from the poll results, work was by far the number one. So I'm going to speak to that in my responses, and then going into some help pieces here too. But what do you do? What's step one, right? What is the first thing you can do? So this is going to sound a little bit like, okay, maybe stop saying that so much, MaryBeth, but I'm going to. The first thing is to give yourself permission to be human. Really. I think that you use the word buck up, right? And there is so much conversation and mindset around like, just muscle your way through it. We can hustle our way into success and, just make it happen. Just put your armor on and go into battle. Like, you'll make it out. Which is a very masculine approach to how to function. And when I say masculine, I'm not just referring to men. Men and women both have masculine and feminine qualities within us, The most balanced humans are the ones that have a balance of masculine and feminine energy. And what I found, though, that during this time of COVID is that we really need to get back in balance with the feminine aspects of ourselves. And again, that's for men and women, in recognizing that instead of bucking up and, muscling our way through and meeting those, expectations of everyone around us, that perhaps the first thing we actually should do is to pause, relax, and go within to start asking meaningful questions on, what do I need to do to be well right now? What is one thing I can give myself to have more permission to be human? Do I need to have a conversation with my supervisor? Do I need to have a conversation with my partner? Do I need to have a conversation with my children, my best friend, whoever it may be, to really start owning that we are perfectly imperfect, that none of us have it all together. I was doing a keynote for the Maryland Career Consortium. So all of the universities in the state of Maryland, anybody Career Center came together, and on the development team behind the event, we were just doing a pre-event kind of conversation. And these are professionals that are high-level executives in their space. And just in the pre-event and planning, they started talking about what they were going through and how much stress they were experiencing. And listening to these two other leaders, I was just listening. I wasn't even facilitating. It was amazing to hear them say to one another, oh my gosh, I didn't know you were experiencing that. I always saw you as someone who had it completely all together. Now I feel like it's okay that I don't have it all together. And so even just something as simple as that, of like, I don't have it all figured out. I teach this. Like, this is what I do for a profession, and I don't have it all figured out by any means. But what I do have figured out is how to be kind and generous and loving to myself first, so that then I can authentically give that to other people. And so, step one is to pause and to reflect and to really make the space to start to think through, what can I do? And I have an exercise, if we have time to share what that could look like, Sherifah.
Oh, please.
Okay, awesome. So this is a pretty simple exercise that anyone can do. It's called a drain fill list. And so if you're going to pause and make time to reflect, this would be a wonderful way to do it. So it's exactly what it sounds like. What's draining your energy and what's filling your energy up? So you can start to think about, do I want to just focus in work? Do I just want to focus in health? Do I want to just focus in parenting, finances, being a caregiver? Anything's here. You can put a filter through it if you want to just look at certain aspects of your life. But otherwise, you can look at the whole picture and just make a list. What's draining me? What's taking energy away? What's filling me? What's putting energy into my life? And then once you all have it out, start to look through the list and see, where can I make some changes when it comes to these drains? Where can I ask for help? Where can I set a boundary? Where can I delegate? Where can I just say no? And when the fills, how can I be more intentional about doing this more often? How can I activate this on purpose on a regular basis? And through that process of looking at it on paper, I don't know about you, Sherifah, but I'm the kind of person, when I got a lot going on in my head, once I get it on paper, it just feels like an exhale. Like, okay, now it's not spinning all over the place. Now I can see it. And once you can see it, you can be really thoughtful in what's next. What do I do next? What's the first baby step? That's actually one of the pitfalls I find with a lot of folks I work with, is they want to do it all at once. They're like, okay, I'm going to get rid of all of these drains and only have fills. And that, first of all, that's just not realistic. That's not how it works. That's not what it means to be alive. We're always going to have experiences that drain and fill us. But the other side of it is, meet yourself where you are, not where you want to be. So if, for example, something that's draining you is not having a morning routine, don't go into like, well, I'm going to set this 2-hour morning routine and I'm going to set my alarm 2 hours earlier and I'm going to take it all on. What if instead you just set your alarm for 5 minutes earlier and did something that took 5 minutes, and then you just slowly build on those changes versus trying to do a full hard reset across all of life. Take the baby steps. All the baby steps add up over time.
No, that's wonderful. I actually just took some notes myself, but that's all well and good. And I do think that that's a great first step. However, from a real life perspective, just from some of the folks I've spoken to in the past, friends, colleagues, and things of that sort, being able to say you're reaching out to people, let's say, for example, based on our poll, work, right, had the highest rating. You had, whether it's a manager who is demanding some level of productivity from you. And now all of a sudden, because of everything that's going on, you're not as productive as you once were, not because you're not able to, but just because I guess you're not able to at this time, depending on what you're dealing with. However, a lot of us, if anyone's like me, tends to be personal and don't necessarily want to put your business out there, to your manager to say, hey, here's what I'm dealing with, right? So, how does one, maneuver that balance whereby, okay, I want to pause. I want to know what's draining me. And maybe part of the drain might be maybe some of the deadlines I'm getting are just too aggressive for me right now based on where I am. How can one have a conversation, whether it's their manager or if it's, their colleagues, that, allows them to hopefully get the grace they need to be able to still get work done and hopefully do it in a way that, everyone can be on the same table, especially if one shies away from, putting their personal business out there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one that probably a lot of people were thinking, like, that's all nice in theory, but what is the actual way in which I go about doing something, especially if I've never done this before, especially if I don't feel psychological safety around having that conversation, right? So some people may feel like I can't actually speak up about this or set a boundary because I'm going to lose my job. I won't get put on that project next time. I certainly won't be somebody who's seen as like an up and comer or whatever it is. So there's a fear of what's going to happen to me if I have a label attached to me as somebody who needs extra help right now, or to have different boundaries or support. And that's something that we need to change as a society at large. And it doesn't happen by one magic conversation. It happens by hundreds of them happening all the time, and that it becomes a regular conversation. So if you happen to be somebody who's in an organization where you don't feel like you have psychological safety and there is a major fear in how you go about speaking up about your experience, and so using like deadlines as an example, I recommend starting by going to HR and asking for coaching, advice, feedback, support. And you can say to your HR professional, I don't even know what to do or what might be possible. I don't know about our mental health policies. I really want to get more educated on what I can take advantage of and, where there may be some limits. So I think that sometimes when it feels like, oh, I'm asking for something that's not possible because I've never seen anybody else do it, you can learn through conversations with your HR team that there actually are some mental health things in place that maybe you weren't aware of. A lot of organizations now are doing mental health days. So instead of using regular sick time, you can actually take a mental health day that comes out of a specific bucket of time. And so that would be for folks who really have a pretty major fear around what might happen. And so that's something that would be a confidential conversation that you can then decide what you do next as a result of that. But if you're somebody who just hasn't said it before, but you think, you have a supervisor who would probably be responsive to that, for starters, it's a very vulnerable conversation. So the first thing that you'd want to do is get grounded in why this matters to you, Or why do I want to have this conversation? What's my intention behind this? What result do I want to get? So even before stepping into the Zoom room with them or picking up the phone or meeting in person, whatever it is these days, really getting clear with yourself on why do I need this? Why does it matter to me? So that it doesn't turn into a conversation about something else. So you can get really grounded in that. And then one of the tips that I teach people all the time when I coach is intent before content. So what is that intention? Share that first. Why do you want to have this conversation? And then get into the meat of what you have to say. And so an intention might sound something like this. You know, Sherifah, I'm coming to you in a way that I know I haven't before. And to be completely honest, I feel really vulnerable right now, but I feel it's important I have this conversation with you because I really need to get clarity on what's possible for me in my role and with what I'm dealing with in my life.
Now, I think that's wonderful. And I think just from a follow-up to that, I'm sure there are individuals who, from a work perspective, who may be in a situation whereby they're probably considering quitting their jobs, maybe, to maybe take time off, to kind of clear their heads, or in a situation whereby they don't have the luxury to quit their job and they're kind of having to, because they need, the financial assistance to obviously keep their lives going. How, in terms of, I hear what you said about maybe talking to HR, but my question too is there a way, or do you have any advice around, even if it's from a colleague perspective within the workplace? Because maybe if a person doesn't feel, like you said, psychologically safe, maybe talking to their manager about it, is there something that can be done? Or maybe not necessarily even want to talk to HR about it. Is there anything, would you recommend, like maybe a mentor or some kind of a colleague to at least get that initial conversation started? And the reason I mentioned that is because I've heard, and even to a certain extent, even experienced sometimes situations whereby, and this is not about a male or female thing, but for example, when you have moms who are dealing with homeschooling for their children, or you have someone who for the first time is having to be a caregiver for their elderly parent, and they're doing all that, and then they have demands on their jobs. Sometimes their manager, especially if it's a male, may have their significant others dealing with those stressors, which they don't experience firsthand. So you might go talk to your manager, but they might not be understanding because they can't really put themselves in your shoes, because you're looking at it from a female perspective, and their perspective might be completely different.
Yeah, that's like empathy. That's all you're talking about. And there definitely is a need for more empathy in the workplace. And thankfully, there's significantly more research and evidence that's proving that when we're more empathetic people, we have more productive employees and teams, and more loyalty, and more trust is ignited, and psychological safety, and all those wonderful things that we want to have. And so if you're working for an individual who doesn't have empathy, and that is not a quality that they embody, and this idea of figuring out who could you talk to, who could be another starting point if HR doesn't feel like a good place either. You're right, absolutely. If you have a mentor in the workplace, or it doesn't even have to be in your workplace per se. A mentor in life is a wonderful person to talk to and get some feedback on. One of the things I really recommend is that you don't ask someone for directions to a place they've never been. So don't ask somebody who's never set boundaries or never had a difficult conversation or never was vulnerable, and go to people who have developed these skills in their lives, that they are masterful at these kinds of conversations. And maybe you don't know somebody that way, which means it could be an opportunity to go seek professional support in that area. There's somebody who is an expert in how to do that kind of work, so that you're really getting grounded advice versus gossip. And so I think that a lot of times there's a fine line between support and gossip. And it's one thing for me to go and talk to a bunch of other people about the issues I'm having with one person or one experience, but not getting a solution. I'm just sharing it for the sake of, like, I want other people to know that I'm suffering. Like, are you suffering? Because I'm suffering. Are you suffering? Because I'm suffering, right? We all do this. We all have different levels in which we do this. But what we don't realize is that we're passing on that negative energy to every single person that we're sharing that story with. And then they're passing it on to all the people that are in their lives, whether they're talking about the story or it's just now like attached to them as something they're carrying with them. We all have been in like a meeting where something really bad went down and then you had to talk to everybody about it outside the meeting, right? And so this is another example of, we really want to be thoughtful about who we talk to with information that's really precious, information that's very vulnerable and sacred to us, because the last thing that you want to have happen in a vulnerable moment is for it to become gossip instead of a tool for change and transformation. So again, find the people, go to the individuals who you've seen as a success, who have proven that this is possible, whether that's within your organization or somewhere else. And these also could be people you've heard talk on a podcast about it, right? Or it doesn't have to be someone you know personally. There's so much free, amazing thought leadership out there these days on how you can get this kind of support. But really grounding yourself in why does it matter, and being clear when you begin any of those conversations.
No, absolutely. And I know based on our poll, other than work, the next highest level that individuals wanted to hear more about was in the health area. We are going to be going into our Q&A portion soon. So if anyone has any questions, this would be a great opportunity for you to pop that into the Q&A box. But just to kind of kickstart from a health perspective, like I mentioned earlier, there are individuals who've either dealt with COVID themselves or who have had loved ones deal with that, or even just other ailments. I have friends, who have, teenage kids just like I do, who, even I myself, I find myself trying to encourage, one of my teenage kids to say, hey, go outside and go for a walk. And it took a while, for her to feel comfortable going out to just go for a walk, because it was like, oh, I don't want to get COVID. I'm like, no, you don't get that from going for a walk. But that is how, like my daughter could have internalized that. But it's just a situation whereby there's so many other people, who are going through that as well. And there are individuals right now who are having to deal with loved ones, dealing with health issues, or dealing with health issues themselves. So work really has now become a secondary factor as it relates to this. And, when you talk about the whole concept of giving yourself permission to be human and being able to pause, and take care of yourself, again, that question goes to, from a health perspective, what kind of support or what kind of advice would you give for a person who is either having to deal with health issues themselves and maybe are dealing with health issues from the stress from work, or dealing with the health issues as a result of stress from work and from personal life, in terms of being able to breathe and as you said, pause and do those things that that you've recommended. Because it's one thing to hear it, it's a completely different thing to actually figure out how to put that into practice.
Yeah, and I'm very fortunate to be married to a wellness coach. So I have a wonderful partner in helping me with my physical health, especially during this time and like ramping up. And I think that oftentimes getting somebody else involved is a beautiful way to have accountability. So like you were just talking about with your daughter, perhaps there's something that's like, okay, me and my daughter are going to take a walk every day. That's something we're going to do together. So not only does it activate our physical health, it also creates connection and unity between us. When we're together, we can have deeper conversations. We can talk about whatever it is that we want that maybe we wouldn't if we were just in the house sitting around, but this is an intentional experience. I know that having accountability partners can be massively transformative when it comes to these kinds of things. This is why people get personal trainers, why they join groups in the gym and things like that, and figuring out what is my baby step, right? Just like we said earlier, not about like, okay, I'm going to massively transform every single thing in my life. That's beautiful. If you're the kind of person who really can do that, amazing, go for it. I'm not saying that you can't do that. That's definitely an option. But for most of us, it's only going to be an option until it stops, and then it's going to feel like a huge failure because we didn't sustain it. And so what is the first baby step in our health? Maybe it has to do with just drinking more water. Maybe it has to do with, I have an if-then policy. If a meeting gets unexpectedly canceled, then I go for a walk in nature. So I always, if a meeting gets canceled, as long as it's not like downpour raining or something like that, I know that's going to kickstart me into more movement than I would normally have, which, as we know, physical health is directly connected to our mental health. So the more that we can get in action, the better. And it doesn't even have to be like traditional ways that everybody else thinks about health. And it can be, what's your way? So Sherifah, I was just sharing with you the other day, like one of the things that I always do is put one song on and have a little dance party just to that one song. And that's it. So what's a song? 5 minutes or less? And it can completely transform my entire experience because I've taken the time to move energy through my body and get into more of circulation and flow so that I'm not so stuck in whatever it was that was going on before. So there's lots of different ways that are possible. And what I would encourage people is to tune into their own values, tune into what makes them feel good. So going on a walk is great for me because I really value unity with nature. That matters a lot. For others, it might be more connection. And so going on a walk with a friend or a roommate or a partner or whoever, that's going to be better. For others, it might be more about their own personal motivations and accomplishment and success. So they want to define, okay, that means I'm going to do these 3 things. But just like you said with your breath too, just using our breath as a tool to slow down, to tune in. Before we started this conversation, we did that, and it can be transformative in our mental and physical well-being.
No, absolutely. We have several questions that are coming through, so I want to make sure we can get to as many as possible. One of the first questions we have in the Q&A is there such a thing as too much empathy? At some point, does empathy become enabling?
Yeah, there is. It's a great question. So Brene Brown always talks about boundaries. So how much you need to have boundaries. So she says like vulnerability without boundaries isn't vulnerability. And the same goes for empathy. So you need to have a boundary associated to this. And so this is actually feels very personal right now because we have a team member who is going through a very, very, very hard time, like really hard. And it's kind of one of these situations that it's like, wow, you didn't think it could get worse, and then it does. And she's even talked to us just yesterday about how she feels so badly about the energy that she's bringing into our space because we work out of our home, and she comes here. And she's like, I feel so bad about the energy that I'm bringing into this home because I know it affects all of us in how low she's been. And I will say that we were starting to set some boundaries with our empathy, right? So it's like, we can have empathy for sure with all of her needs and being kind and generous and constantly reminding her that she can cry here. This is a safe place to express herself. She can choose not to engage in conversations if that doesn't feel good for her. But we're pretty extreme in this house because of the work that we do. I recognize it's not a traditional workplace for most, but it really is important that you have created an agreement with one another of what that means. So it's one thing to just generally say like, all right, Sherifah, take all the time you need. Well, what does that mean? What does take all the time you need mean? So I would much prefer that people set some boundaries around that and say, okay, why don't we take it a day at a time? Let's check in every Wednesday to see where we are and what adjustments we may need to make. And it could potentially get to a point where somebody else needs to come in and take over some responsibilities, and that person could be transitioned into some other work. Or perhaps it's an experience where that person really needs to be off and take long-term leave as a result of what they need to do to be well. So the boundaries piece is huge. I think a lot of times we make statements like take all the time you need, but we really don't mean it.
True.
So we haven't set clear expectations on what do we do next. So even with our team member, it was like, okay, here's what we can agree to, and here's what we need to make sure is still happening every day.
Right.
So if these things can't still happen every day, that's all right, but we're going to need somebody else to support those things happening every day.
And step in. No, I definitely concur. So it's one thing to be empathetic, but still have boundaries set around that. So that way, you know, there's some sort of a sense of balance as it relates to that. So the next question we have, I think we've touched on a little bit, but someone did ask about how to deal with multiple problems at once: divorce, work, kids, health issues. Balancing life pretty much.
Yeah, whoever sent that in, my heart goes out to you. Personally, over this past year has been some of the most trying mental health experiences in my own life for the same kinds of reasons, just like everything happening at once. And it's like, once you think you can take a breath of air, you're like, you know, you're treading water and you come up and you're like, okay, I'm going to be all right. And then a big wave comes. And so I can relate to having just like, you think it's stopped and it's just going to keeps coming. And so where do you start? What's step number one? I think that oftentimes, sort of using that same visual of like the waves coming, what we try to do is we try to stand really strong and let the waves crash on us, and then just learn how to like really make ourselves stoic in the process. But really what we need to do is to relax into the wave and allow it to push us back up onto shore, so that we're not trying to fight whatever the situation is, but to surrender to it to a certain extent. And
MaryBeth, you froze there for a minute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Go ahead.
Sorry for that. So how do you actually do that, right? It's one thing to say that and like paint a beautiful picture, but what's the reality? Like, how do I actually do that? I personally take it one step at a time without judgment of pace. So I do not try to tackle every single thing at once. And this is the kind of thing where I do this on a daily basis. So I say to myself, what are the 3 most important things for today? That's it, just 3. What are the 3 most important things for today? So if you're dealing with things like family issues and work issues and personal issues and all of that, well, what 3 can I address today? And again, not from a huge, necessarily massively transformative thing. That's beautiful if you can do that. But what's one baby step in them? So maybe it's I'm going to reach out to somebody I can talk to about this. That's what I can do first. And the being, just continuing to recalibrate with yourself and to be kind and generous when you stumble, because particularly if this is new, it can feel easy to just want to give up, because it's like, well, this didn't work and I knew it wasn't ever going to work. So I'm just going to go back to numbing myself like I always have, because I know that and I'm comfortable with that. And so instead, what is a new choice that I could try today? And if it doesn't work out in my favor, maybe I can try it again tomorrow in another way.
I like that. In essence, giving yourself permission to be human, huh?
Exactly, Sherifah, exactly.
All right, so the next question we have, the person says, being a people person and now working at home, I get lonely during the day. Also, it seems just because we are working at home, we are expected to be at our laptops 100% of the time. People feel that they can reach out to you at any time, regardless if you're in a meeting or not.
So is the question, what do I do about that?
I'm assuming that's the, I think, so what I'm getting from that statement is a situation right now. It's the whole kind of like the Zoom effect, right? It's the, because people are home now, people find like it's okay to call you at 7, 8 o'clock when it's time for dinner, whereas before you knew that when you left work at 5 or 6 o'clock, there's that demarcation between work and home. But now that we're working from home, I think based on what I'm getting from reading this, it's almost like there's no delineation anymore, because you're home, which quote unquote means you're always available for work.
Right. Yeah, it's true. And this is unfortunately not a unique situation. This is really a big experience, I think, all over the world right now. And it really gives us this false sense of availability, because, oh, everything's so much more flexible now because we're at home. But the reality is, it's not. It's really not. We still need to have boundaries. And so the answer is just that, boundaries. What is a boundary that you can set? And this is where it can feel like very vulnerable to have that conversation. It may not feel safe to have that conversation. So you have to take those steps we talked about before in getting really clear and grounding in, why does this matter? Am I going to constantly be a victim of this person calling me at 7 o'clock at night? Or am I going to say, Sherifah, I recognize that we have different working styles. And for me, I really need to shut down at 6 o'clock. And so I want to get clear on you on how we agree to what merits a phone call after that time. And that can feel like, how could I ever say that to my boss, right? Like, I can't say that to my boss. And so if that feels like the starting point, then you can start with, I feel really like I don't even know if I can have this conversation, because I feel very vulnerable in the process and I don't want to offend you and I want to be a team player, right? You can say the things that you're thinking in your head. You don't have to just keep them up here. You can say, like, the reason I haven't talked about this sooner is because I really want to be a team player and I thought that I could make this work. But after this much time, I'm realizing how much it's impacting me in a way that I don't think I can show up as my best self tomorrow, when I don't get to have the evening to be and to de-stress and to be with my family or whatever else it might be, and having that conversation. So a starting point, it could literally be just asking, like, what agreements can we make? I'm sure you've heard me say this before, Sherifah, which is expectations minus agreement equals disappointment. So if somebody has an expectation that you can call at any time, but nobody ever talked about that and had an agreement about it, it's going to create disappointment for one side of that party. But if you are clear on your expectations of, okay, Sherifah, I'm going to need to call you after hours, probably 3 times a month, or maybe every night this week because of this project, Does that work for you? Can we, or, what else do we need to figure out if that doesn't work? That's a very different thing. It's like we each come in with our own expectations, but we don't talk about them out loud. So we assume that we share the same expectations, but we don't. So we need to start having clear conversations around not only what we expect, but then what do we agree to in order to create satisfaction between the two people or that entire experience at large.
Absolutely. And that really kind of goes, again, back into the whole concept of boundaries, right? And setting, the right boundaries and expectations. So I think we have time for maybe just one more question. Someone here put in, and I think you've talked a little bit about it, but I think this would be a nice wrap up. It says, can you talk about strategies for building empathy for coworkers' unique situations, which you may not have experience with? That is dealing with children, financial concerns, etc.
Yeah. Well, one of the most powerful ways I've ever experienced building empathy is through listening fully. So a lot of times when we're listening to someone, we are waiting to respond. Everything that's going in our head is like, how am I going to respond to this? How can I relate to this? What does this have to do with my life, right? Versus, how can I get to understand them better? How can I be in their situation? How can I have some respect for what they're going through? Versus like, I don't know about that. I don't have kids. Like, I can't have any empathy for that because I don't have a connection to that. And so what I would recommend is, so this is a practice that you can do. This could feel like no way, we're never doing that, but this is something that I facilitate often. It may feel a little bit advanced, but for other people, it may feel like the perfect starting point. We do something called the circle of presence. And that is, you can either do it amongst two people or you can do it with a group. And you literally give everybody the same amount of time. So if it's two people, you could give each other 5 minutes each. The first person shares for 5 minutes, whatever it is they want to share, and the other person just listens. They don't respond, they don't engage, they don't ask questions. All they do is listen. And then the second person does the same thing, and you reverse if this is a pair. And then afterwards, you reflect back to each other what you heard, what you appreciated, what you felt as a result of really listening to what they were sharing. So empathy typically is, the connector can get lost when you didn't hear what somebody actually was going through, when you didn't actually process it and recognize that it's a part of the human experience. Even if you haven't gone through that part of it, you can feel and be connected to their experience by truly listening. And having those skills it's going to get you so much further in all your relationships in life, everywhere. It doesn't just have to be at work. People
Absolutely.
feel something when they're heard. And that's part of, my personal mission is for voices to be heard. Because so many people will raise their voice and be vulnerable and say, I can't do this anymore. And then they're not actually heard.
Yeah, not to cut you off, it's 1 o'clock. So I just want to be mindful for those of you who have to leave at 1 o'clock. I want to thank you guys so much for attending today's session. We will have a copy of the recorded session sent to everyone. In addition to that, for those of you who have attended today, as a token of our appreciation, we will actually be entering everyone in for a raffle. And the winners will get a copy of MaryBeth's soon-to-be released book, Permission to be Human. When's that coming out? Is that in June?
June 8th. June 8th. It's going to be here before we know it.
Fantastic. And we will have details within that email on how you can get in touch with MaryBeth in case you have any questions that we have not been able to get with, and also in case you want a coaching session with her, or just have a chat. So thank you guys again so much. We are going to probably extend for 10 minutes for those of you who are interested in hearing the rest of MaryBeth's response and for any other questions that have come in. So thank you guys so much. And don't forget, let us all give ourselves permission to be human. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Sherifah.